So before you tonight, we have proposed amendments, an ordinance and a resolution for off-street parking in the window area, amendments for Legacy Crossing redevelopment area. And so just to give a brief recap of what we did there, in 2012, Legacy Crossing redevelopment area implemented three elements. First was the urban mixed commercial zoning district. We also had the Legacy Crossing design guidelines and the overlay district. The urban mixed commercial zoning district really had all the allowed uses, building heights, setbacks, limitations on uses, things of that nature. Design guidelines had building facade elements, major pedestrian right-of-ways, traffic right-of-ways, things of that nature implemented into the plan. And then the overlay district was a way to convey the design guidelines. And so all three of those elements work in concert together. Really, we had the first chance to do a dry run with the Urban Renewal Agency, issued an RFP of last year for three projects on the corner of 6th and Jackson. During that review, we had identified a couple of areas of the design guidelines that could use some minor tweaking. The first was the off-street parking. Within the urban mixed commercial zoning district, we have special off-street parking requirements for the urban nature of urban mixed commercial, and so the current requirements are really 50% of what's required within the use table. Within the design guidelines, we also have off-street parking requirements as well. A lot of those exempt out office and retail uses as providing off-street parking. Residential is one per dwelling unit. And then we have other requirements for assembly areas and medical offices. So really just avoiding the inconsistency between the two regulations. You have it one in the urban mixed commercial and one in the design guidelines. That could cause some confusion to people working with the requirements. And so what we're proposing to do is shift the table from the design guidelines into the urban mixed commercial zone. It's going to be the same table as the design guidelines with minor tweak, and that's going to be to amend the residential to do 50% of what's required by the code. And so that would be the off-street parking. The other area that we had identified was the window opening area requirements. And so anytime you have buildings that have ground floors adjacent to major streets or pedestrian ways, you're required to have a certain area of window opening, and it's 50 to 85%. Well, staff was a little shocked when we ended up reviewing the proposals, and most of them met the 50% to 85% requirement, but whereas you looked at maybe a facade elevation and it would appear that it was maybe around 60 to 65%. Once we did the calculations, it actually came out to be somewhere around 50 to 55%. So just looking at the number of allowed uses within urban mixed commercial zone, you're not always going to have retail on the ground floor. You could have medical office, you could have residential. And then the recent market analysis of that area indicating that you know, probably a high market for residential and some office uses. Thought that we'd tweak that slightly and to allow 35, as low as 35% for some of those other uses. And this just provides a little bit of flexibility for developments that may not have retail on the ground floor. And so that's really the crux of the amendments before you tonight. Planning and Zoning did conduct a public hearing, and that happened on May 13th, and they recommended approval of the ordinance as well as the resolution as presented. And staff's recommendation is to conduct a public hearing, and after considering any testimony, approve the ordinance under suspension of the rules requiring 3 complete and separate readings, and that it be read by title and published by summary. And if the ordinance is approved, to approve the resolution. And I'd certainly be able to answer any questions that you might have.
Questions for Michael? Or
just one, and I think it's in there, but I want to double check. Does the stipulation that the maximum parking still stay at 100% level as opposed to going to the Black Friday 150% overbuild of parking areas?
Yeah, there's no change to that, so that still remains the same. This would just be affecting the minimum parking requirement.
Okay. Walter?
Thank you, Mayor. Mike, I've commented before that I'm not a zoning guy. I don't know whether I do it with pride or shame, but anyway, I'm not. You've got the urban mixed commercial zoning district and the Legacy Crossing overlay zone. Help me, do those, the overlay zone literally overlays the urban mixed?
Correct. Yeah, if you think of it as layers, we have all the underlying zoning districts. Well, the overlay district is a special overlay that just affects the Legacy Crossing area. So you could have urban mixed commercial in some other area of town. It could be
Okay.
like R1, somewhere else. But it's just specifically the Legacy Crossing overlay just for the area of Legacy Crossing that we had,
And if I may,
Okay.
and the changes that you're proposing tonight have to do within the urban mixed commercial zone, not the overlay zone, even though the overlay zone may be part of that.
Well, the overlay zone is the conduit for the design guidelines. And so we're proposing to change certain aspects of the design guidelines.
Which are carried to
Which are
certain
carried-
places by the
Correct. Through the overlay
Legacy
zone.
Crossing overlay zone.
Correct.
Okay,
Correct.
that's a little better. Thank you.
Okay, other questions?
Still not
from
clear,
Mike?
but
Thank you, Mike. I'm going to open the public hearing now to hear testimony in favor of this ordinance change. Seeing none, rush to the podium. Any general comments or opposition to this? With that, I close the public hearing at 7:38. Discussion amongst the council. Dan, you guys heard this on the 22nd of June in the admin.
did. And with that, I would make a motion that we go ahead and approve the ordinance under suspension of the rules requiring 3 complete and separate readings, and it be read by title and published by summary.
Second that motion?
Okay, we've got a motion made by Dan, a second by Jim Boland to approve the ordinance for the proposed amendments to Title 4, Chapter 3 in the Legacy Crossing Design Guidelines to amend the off-street parking and the window opening regulations or requirements. Walter, I'll start with you.
aye.
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 Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Okay, and that goes by 6-0. Now we have, is this ordinance 2015-10?
Yes, it is.
Okay, good guess. Okay, ordinance number 2015-10, an ordinance of the City of Moscow, Idaho, a municipal corporation in the state of Idaho, providing for the amendment of Moscow City Code Title 4, Chapter 3 for the modification of the off-street parking requirements, providing that the provisions of this ordinance be deemed severable and providing for this ordinance to be in full force and effect from the date of its passage, approval, and publication according to law. Now we have a resolution that we need to discuss. It's on the back side of this, or approve this. And this has to do with some of the things that Walter brought up about authorizing the amendment of the crossing of the overlay district designs.
Your Honor, I'd make a motion that we go ahead and approve the resolution that that accepts the Legacy Crossing design, overlay zone design guidelines.
I'll second.
Okay, we got a motion by Dan and a second by John to approve the resolution. We'll start with you, John.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
And aye.
Okay.